Well, welcome everybody. My name's Suzanne, and I'm in Aaron's Chelation group here on Facebook. And today we're going to be doing a Q&A with Jeff Hoyt on understanding zeolite and effective detox. So I actually met Jeff last year after I'd been taking Detox. I was okay at first, and then I started getting these really bad redistribution symptoms. And their support staff just kept telling me to take less and one drop every couple of days. And I was getting so bad. So finally, I just decided I was going to Google, and I typed in Detox and dosage. And up popped Jeff Hoyt's, what I now call his dosing theory dossier, which is this like 14-page document that's just brilliant. And it discusses how if you take the wrong dose of zeolite, especially if you take less than what you need, you're actually going to feel worse. So I got in contact with Jeff and told him what was going on. And he proceeded to tell me that, these liquid zeolites, you need like 20 bottles in order to get a proper dose. So, and at the same time, he was also telling me about his mother who had been on OSR for 2 years. She had 14 amalgams in her teeth, bless her heart. And he was in the process of helping her get them removed through a biological dentist. And from there, he introduced me to all of Haley's research. And from there, I found Aaron's group. He was over on MeWe at the time. So I got on OSR and everything was going great. I was able to take the high dosage with no problem. And then about 6 months in, my immune system just went crazy. And I was waking up every day with all manner of rashes and hives. My joints were swollen. I tried everything, and I just could not get my immune system to calm down. So I reached back out to Jeff again to see what was going on and if he had any ideas. And he had just launched his new formulation of zeolite, which is ZeoCharge. And so he mentioned that, and I'm like, do you have anything else? I really was not motivated to take another zeolite, especially like when you're already feeling bad. But he had also completed some case studies where he had tested people in real time, many of them very sick, and had published his results. So I took a look over that, and that's finally really what convinced me to like, okay, give this a try. And it's really been a game changer for me. It completely calmed down my central nervous system, my immune system. And then I was able to start taking the OSR again, but I had a completely different experience. No more of these awful symptoms. So anyway, I had mentioned this to Aaron and asked Jeff if he would be willing to do a Q&A. There's a group of us that have already started taking it. And there were a bunch of questions that came streaming in. People have also DM me their questions. So for this Q&A, what we'd like to ask everybody is if you can please just type in your questions just for time constraints, and that way we can get to as many as possible. But I think as you'll find that as Jeff is covering his content, a lot of your questions are going to be answered. And also everything that Jeff is discussing is on his website. So with that, welcome, Jeff, and thank you so much for taking time to do this for us. I know you're a busy guy, and we really appreciate it.
Well, absolutely. I'm happy to be here and answer some questions. And thank you for setting this up and for everyone that submitted questions.
Yeah, we're a pretty savvy group. So we've all got really great questions.
All right.
But first of all, what got you started down the road of natural health, and why did you go through like all the trouble and expense to formulate your own zeolite when there's a ton of them on the market right now?
Sure. Well, I did have some childhood issues, just somewhat of a traumatic birth experience. I was on antibiotics for a lot of my childhood, but overall pretty normal. At least at the time, I thought it was normal. It probably wasn't as healthy as I could have been, but started having some issues in high school. And then I had a series of shots in the arm when I turned 18 for a high school physical. And that's where things really kind of started spiraling downhill, chronic viral recurring infections and just more autoimmune symptoms and all sorts of issues there. And that kind of led me on my journey to finding alternative methods because the conventional doctors and just that whole methodology wasn't really working for me. So I started getting into functional medicine, alternative practices, which really interest me. And that I did find a lot of results from that. I'm still on a healing journey, as I think most of us are, because the way I look at it, we're not going to be healthy by accident anymore. We have to just take action to continually take control of our health, but definitely a lot better than
Absolutely.
I was. And so I got into kind of functional medicine. I did a little bit of training, and then my interest really was spurred with supplements. And when I started looking at a lot of the supplements, specifically natural nutraceutical formulas, I was realizing that there was some really good ingredients out there, but a lot of times the dosing wasn't what was needed, or at least what was recommended on the label wasn't what was needed, or what I call a therapeutic dose, the dose needed to get the desired effect. So I started a company that was basically tailored around getting therapeutic doses for polysaccharide extract. So that was all based on immune regulation. We were getting really good results. The challenge was people were needing such high doses with that. It was just sometimes undoable because they were doing these very large packages for immune regulation. And there was something missing. I didn't know what it was at the time. And then I came across Zeolite, and I realized that just detox in general was kind of the missing link from what I was doing, because you can regulate your immune system, you can deal with all these things that are causing issues. But if we don't remove some of these root cause issues, we're not going to get sustainable results. And then when I was introduced into Zeolite, I quickly realized that Zeolite was one of the more powerful products on the market, but potentially the most misused and misunderstood products as well. So I really went into a deep dive into Zeolite, really what it is, what it can do, the difference between the liquids and the powders. And that was a number of years ago. And that really led me to where I am today, where I launched ZeoCharge through Zeolite Labs, which I'm really trying to provide one, education on how to properly use Zeolite, and then two, providing a quality product, because a lot of the products in the market are just not ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, many of us have found that out through trial and error as well. And so you talk about the three P's in your product.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I kind of say the three things that really set our zeolite apart are the three P's: purity, particle size arrangement, and proof. So one, it's going to be pure. It's going to be important to find a pure zeolite, because there's a lot of zeolite deposits. Zeolite's a naturally occurring mineral. So there's a lot of zeolite mines around the world. A lot of them are not very pure. A lot of them are contaminated. A lot of them are not a high percentage of the active zeolite ingredient, which is clinoptilolite. That's what we use. There's just a lot of issues. A lot of zeolite comes from commercial mines, because zeolite is used for water filtration and other industrial applications. Our zeolite comes from a mine specifically designed for mining zeolite for human consumption. So it doesn't have all the heavy equipment that could potentially be spilling diesel, et cetera. It's just, there's more measures taken to ensure quality, purity. And then you have the particle size arrangement. And that's really where a lot of the confusion comes in with zeolite, because you've got all these different particle sizes. Now you've got the larger particle size traditional zeolites, which stay in the gut, act as a binder. And then later came out these liquid zeolite products, where they basically further reduce the particle size of the zeolite, mix them with water, and they're marketing those for more of a systemic full body detox. And we see benefits to both. So we combined basically what we found on the market, the liquids and the powders. We kind of found the best of both, and we combined them into one product. Because what a lot of people were doing at the time was actually mixing various zeolite products to get the range of particle sizes that they found the best results with. So we said, well, let's just put that all into one product. So basically, the particle size arrangement, we're taking the best of the liquids, the powders, putting it into one product. So you don't need to get more than one. And then the proof that it works. And this is really the one I think that sets us apart more than anything else, because there's a lot of claims out there on zeolite, a lot of people saying it removes this, that, but there's not a lot of proof backing up those statements. So before launching our company and our product, we did a case studies program to see exactly what ZeoCharge can do. And from that, we were able to see that, yes, it was clearly able to remove heavy metals from the tissue level. And it was also able to improve vitamin status and improve mineral status, which was definitely one of the concerns with zeolite supplements. Is it going to negatively impact nutrient status? So the case studies program gave us a lot of insights, but those are really the three things. It's a pure product. It's got the particle size arrangement to meet your detox needs, and it's got the proof actually showing that it goes beyond type. It actually works.
Great. Absolutely. And it's third party tested as well, right?
Absolutely. Yep. We've got third-party testing showing the composition of the zeolite for one. So one, it shows that it's not contaminated with heavy metals. Two, it shows that it does have essential minerals present for exchange because zeolite works by an exchange process. Another interesting thing on our analysis is that it shows that our zeolite is 74.8% silicone. And that's important because the higher the silicone to aluminum ratio, the more stable the structure is going to be. So 74.8% silicone is very high. It's the highest we've seen. It also shows that we have our zeolite is 94% clinoptilolite. There's a lot of zeolites on the market that are 50%, 60%, 70%, and that's just the deposit they're using of zeolite. It contains, let's say 70% clinoptilolite, then the rest is just other organic matter, whatever's, in that deposit. Ours is 94%, which is going to make it more effective. And of that 94%, 74%, 74.8 is silicone, making it a very stable and effective zeolite product.
Got it. So we're going to start out with the four most asked questions that I've gotten from the group. And they were pretty much all of my questions too that I had for you when I first decided to try this. So they're good questions. The first one is, will ZeoCharge leach aluminum into the body and will it cause aluminum toxicity? And, when you're already metal toxic, like the last thing you want is to introduce like more metal toxicity in your body. So I was really concerned about this too. And the other thing is, why does like zeolite in general just get a really bad rap for this? Only yesterday I found another article warning about this. So you see it a lot. It's out there that it can cause this.
Yeah, great question. I mean, yeah, I can tell just from that this is an educated group. You've done your research, which I appreciate. So yeah, when you do your research, that is definitely one of the things that's going to pop up. Don't take zeolite. It's going to cause aluminum toxicity. Now, on the surface, the main reason that that statement is out there is because zeolite by nature is an aluminosilicate, meaning it's comprised of silicone and aluminum. That's what makes its structure. So what some people theorize is that the zeolite particle is going to break down in your body and then break apart, and part of it is aluminum, and that's going to cause aluminum toxicity. Now, there's a few things, and right off the bat, I can prove that our zeolite does not cause aluminum toxicity, so I'll say that right up front. But one thing to consider is that there are a number of types of zeolite out there. Zeolite is a classification of mineral. The type that is primarily used for human consumption and the type that is used in our supplement is called clinoptilolite. The main reason clinoptilolite was the zeolite chosen to be used in humans is because it has a high silicone to aluminum ratio. And the silicone to aluminum ratio is what determines the stability of the structure. So some of the other zeolites, if you were to ingest those, are going to break down in your body and probably cause aluminum toxicity. So those claims are definitely justified. Natural clinoptilolite zeolite has not been shown to do that. It's more stable. Now, there's still a range within clinoptilolite zeolite of the silicone to aluminum ratio. So some of the ratios are 4-to-1, 5-to-1. Ours is 6.33-to-1. That's the 74.8% silicone to 11.8% aluminum, which makes it even more stable than the other already stable clinoptilolite zeolites on the market. So I think the main potentially something I've come across is there was a lab analysis done where they took some zeolite, I don't know which one it was, there was some zeolite product on the market that was put in with hydrochloric acid, and the analysis showed that there was a breakdown of the material. And that's, I think, the main source of confusion why people say that it leaches. But to my knowledge, I've got really the only proof, besides some of the scientific literature, that does show that in general, natural clinoptilolite zeolite doesn't cause aluminum accumulation. Now, synthetic zeolite potentially does. And there was a synthetic zeolite called Zeolite A, which did show tissue accumulation of aluminum. But for the naturals, it doesn't. And then with our personal case studies, we can show that no, it doesn't leach aluminum in the body. And in fact, it generally reduces aluminum in the tissue level. So that's one thing that we can prove that pretty much no other zeolite company can do.
Yeah, and I also noticed from my last test that my lumen levels also went down as well. So yeah, and mine were Mine were generally on the high side.
And if we're being honest, I was, I there was all the theories, but theories can only take you so far. I wasn't 100% sure that the zeolite wasn't going to leach aluminum. When I conducted the case studies, I wasn't even 100% sure what was going to happen. And that's part of the reason we did it, because I didn't want to be recommending a product that is potentially causing the issue people are trying to use it to resolve. So I was relieved, for one, and pleasantly surprised at how not only did it not leach aluminum, but it helped detox aluminum. So that was kind of a relief for us.
Good. And all of this can be found on his website as well. The second most popular question that I was getting, which was also my question too, is will ZeoCharge bind to vitamins and minerals?
Yep. So and I think that's really, no, there's two thoughts though. One, it's not going to directly bind to any essential minerals or vitamins. The reason is that zeolite works by a swap mechanism, cation exchange. So now, once again, not all zeolite. When I'm talking, these generalities are going to be for ZeoCharge, because that's what I have experience with. So yes, some zeolites potentially could bind to essential vitamins and minerals. Ours does not. Now, the reason that is because ours has naturally occurring minerals such as calcium, potassium, sodium, and magnesium. And we actually remineralize the zeolite after our cleaning process to ensure that those essential minerals weren't washed away. Because if a zeolite is cleaned and then not remineralized, it's potential, because the zeolite's cage is looking for something to bind to. So if he doesn't have the minerals to exchange, it might be binding to essential minerals. Ours doesn't do that. And we can prove that through the case studies as well. And I'll just go show a couple right now, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. And then also, isn't it true that because not all zeolite's the same, that especially really cheap zeolite that's on the market that comes from commercial mines that's already contaminated with metals, couldn't they be getting that idea
Oh,
from those as well?
absolutely. Yeah. So that's where the purity comes into play. And honestly, a lot of the zeolites in the market, because zeolite inherently is pretty cheap because it's used for industrial purposes. So a lot of these companies are just taking zeolite from these commercial mines. A lot of them are even in the US, which there's really not any good zeolite in the US. Like from Nevada, they're taking these zeolite products and either just bottling, packaging them and selling them, or then processing them and putting them in water. And it's a big issue because, yeah, when you're putting something in your body to detox, you obviously want to make sure it's not contaminated with something, because you don't want to have a reverse detox effect, as I say. So absolutely, it's just important. They're just questions to ask, before you buy products. Third-party testing, ask for the documents, check them out yourself. Does this zeolite come from a commercial mine? Does it come from a mine specifically for human consumption? Is this product for human consumption? That's a good one. A lot of the zeolites on the market are not even for human consumption. People just think all zeolite's the same, so they buy it. I personally buy zeolite from one of the mines in the US for ice melt for my driveway, because it has ability to be used for ice melt, but I would never put that in my body because it hasn't gone through the processes to be safe for human consumption. So they're just things to be aware of. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so here we'll just go over this real quick because we were talking about aluminum. And this is the tissue level. So the test we're looking at is the Oligo scan, which is measuring the level of metals in the tissue of your hand. So the initial test is in gray, and then you can see the retest, in this case it was 2 months, is reduced. So we're here seeing a 28.3% reduction in aluminum after 2 months, and that was taking a pretty high dose of ZeoCharge, right? 6 tablespoons or 30 grams. So 30 grams of ZeoCharge is higher than almost anyone would recommend besides me. And not only is it not causing accumulation, it's reducing aluminum. Here we have again 4 tablespoons, and we're seeing a 23% reduction after only 3 weeks. Here's a 35% almost reduction after 6 weeks of aluminum. So definitely that answers that. Now, there's way more aluminum, there's way more proof of the aluminum issue on the case studies page, which I'll just point out right here, zeolitelabs.com/proof, or just hit the case studies tab. And there's all sorts of little videos of me going over various case studies. And here's one just showing that ZeoCharge improves vitamins, it balances minerals, etc. All sorts of case studies. On the bottom, there's a few that do talk about aluminum in general. And one more thing I'd like to add on aluminum before we move on to minerals and vitamins is that I personally, because once again, I wanted to make sure the stuff was safe before I'm, mass marketing it. I personally took an entire jar a day of ZeoCharge before launching. That's 150 grams. Now that was very difficult to do because that's a lot of powder to get down in one day. It's a lot of water you have to drink. But I did that for 10 days in a row, 150 grams a day. And I did this test before, I did the test after, and there was no increase in aluminum.
Wow.
So,
No, you didn't
yeah,
take a whole jar at once, did you?
no, I did have to split that up throughout the day just because it was too much. So the first day I did two doses. So I did 75 grams at a time, but then that was just too much water to drink at once. So then the next few days or the next 9 days, I actually split it up all throughout the day.
Okay.
Which yeah. So there's that. But anyway, the point is no aluminum toxicity. We can prove it. And this goes over a bunch of other metals as well. So let me get to the minerals. So here you can see just some of the isolated minerals. And once again, there's way more details on our case studies page. What you can see here is ZeoCharge, copper and zinc levels improving. Those are things people are concerned with. Is it going to bind to copper and zinc? Not directly. Improving there. There's zinc again, improving all sorts of stuff. Let's get to the vitamins. Lots of stuff on this document. All right. So this is what we found, at least me, I found really interesting in the case studies is that ZeoCharge is able to improve vitamin status in the body from a tissue level. And now zeolite doesn't have any vitamins in it. So this is an indirect mechanism. So for example, here, this is after 2 weeks of 2 tablespoons of ZeoCharge, this individual's every single vitamin tested for was improved. The gray line was the baseline. 2 weeks later was the color. You see further saturation in the tissue of these metals, of these vitamins, including vitamin D. You see another one here, 4 tablespoons a day, and 1 tablespoon in this case study there, that equals 20 grams. So 2 tablespoons is 10 grams, 4 tablespoons is 20 grams. Here you see again, improvement in every single vitamin. Here we see again, improvement in every single vitamin. So not only is it not directly binding to or negatively impacting vitamins, it's improving the vitamin status. And that's most likely by reducing oxidative stress in the body, because when your body's under oxidative stress, it has to use up its resources more quickly. So a lot of these vitamins are antioxidants. They're part of your body's total antioxidant capacity. So as you remove some of the source, some of the production of the free radicals and potentially bind directly to free radicals with the ZeoCharge, your body doesn't have to use up the vitamins as quickly. So you have a natural higher level in the tissue of vitamins. Super interesting stuff there.
Really is really fascinating and makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. All right. The next most asked question I got was, and I had this too, when we hear ZeoCharge being talked about out there, some people are referring to it as a chelator. I know for me, when I started researching Detox and some of these liquid zeolites, it was referred to as a chelator. So is it a chelator? Is it a binder? How would you categorize zeolite?
Yeah, I think it's in a class of its own, honestly. I mean, I think traditionally when I think of chelators, I'm thinking of, first of all, synthetic agents. So, things like DMSA, DMPS, OSR, EDTA, things that are designed for a specific purpose. And that purpose is generally to remove heavy metals, primarily. And then you have binders, which are generally going to be your activated charcoals, your bentonite clay, various clays. And those are generally used to bind up environmental toxins and some other stuff, but maybe not as effective as metals. And they're more just kind of, gut binders type of thing. They're not really going in and removing metals from a cell, like potentially a chelator could do. So ZeoCharge, I think, has the ability basically to do both. It's got the properties of a binder where it's able to bind to a number of environmental toxicants, but it also is able to remove heavy metals. And in our case studies, we tested ZeoCharge against 15 heavy metals, and it was able to remove from the tissue level all 15 of those heavy metals. So in terms of that chelation properties, I would say, yeah, ZeoCharge kind of fits in with that category and as a binder. But the thing that really sets it apart, one, it's natural. So I think, there's something to be said for that. It's naturally derived. It's not designed for one specific thing. whereas chelators potentially can be effective at metals, but they might not be removing a lot of the other toxic elements that we're also have accumulated or we're exposed to, whereas ZeoCharge is going to be more broad spectrum. It's working on metals. It's able to bind excess histamine. It's able to bind some mycotoxins. It's able to bind ammonia, environmental toxicants, plastics like BPA, even radioactive particles. Zeolite was used in the Chernobyl disaster to help clean up the environment from nuclear fallout. And it's been studied for water filtration to help bind to strontium and cesium and radioactive isotopes. So it binds to a broad number of things. And then I think what really sets it apart is it's doing all this stuff and it's doing it without binding to the good stuff. So that's always the concern with chelators and even most binders, is that when you're taking it, you're removing the bad, but you're also probably removing the good. And that results in a stressful detox experience and something that generally can't be taken long term because it's causing so much stress on your body. And as we kind of just briefly saw, ZeoCharge is able to remove the metals and other, we didn't look at the other toxicants, but it's able to remove a number of things, but it's able to do so without pulling on your minerals and negatively impacting vitamin status.
Yeah, and that's definitely been my own personal experience on it as well. And as long as we're going down that path, the other question is, well, what does it bind to? Because you call it more of like a selective binder. And I know there's some of the people in the group that have started taking this. The ones that had the most instant, immediate results with this were people with histamine issues, people with ammonia issues. So let's just go through the list of all the things that it binds to or chelates.
Sure. And I think there's things that it is known to directly bind to, and then there's other things that it's known to help detox, and sometimes they're not the same, because there's both a direct detox effect with ZeoCharge, but then there's also sometimes an indirect effect where for whatever reason the body is now dumping some of these other toxic elements for excretion. So I think that's important to realize. So for example, in our case studies, fluorine was able to be, the levels were removed in fluorine. Zeolite has no direct affinity for anything in the halide group like a fluoride or fluorine, but the levels were decreased. So that's more of an indirect effect. But talking more about direct as well. So zeolite's going to be able to bind to heavy metals for one. So, and we can see that from the case studies, all 15 heavy metals. Now, we also have mycotoxins. So zeolite has been used for animal feed to reduce the mycotoxin load, aflatoxins, ochratoxin A, potentially some other mycotoxins, definitely those two. Radioactive isotopes, as I mentioned, definitely cesium, strontium. It's been studied for some other stuff as well, potentially radium. There's more research, of course, that needs to be done in all these things, but definitely some radioactive materials. Metabolic waste products, I do think, are a huge one. So metabolic waste such as ammonia and urea. And I think that that's one of the reasons, as you mentioned, as some people were feeling better when taking it with ammonia issues. Zeolite has a very strong affinity for ammonia. And a lot of people that are dealing with various toxicity issues have a buildup of ammonia, because if there's this toxic burden in the body, the liver's usually not working properly. The body takes ammonia, brings it to the liver where it converts it to urea. That urea then goes to the kidneys and is excreted from the body. So if your liver's not working properly, you can get a buildup of this ammonia. And then you have this free floating ammonia, which is very toxic in the body. It can actually damage the central nervous system. It can go to the blood, past the blood-brain barrier as well, and cause brain fog and a number of issues. So just having that ZeoCharge in there to bind to excess ammonia can immediately make you feel better. Now, if your kidneys aren't working properly, potentially you have a buildup of urea. Zeolite also binds to urea. Now, urea is not quite as toxic as ammonia, but it's good to have something that's able to bind to both, whether your kidneys, liver, or both are not working optimally. So metabolic waste products like that, environmental toxicants. So glyphosate is one that zeolite has a binding affinity to. That's one thing I'm definitely planning on doing coming up here, is to do some research on removing glyphosate in human levels, because right now a lot of the research is more like for water filtration and that kind of stuff. But there is a direct binding affinity to glyphosate, which is nice because that's a pretty huge issue in our world today. Some of the other environmental toxicants, BPA, the plastic, right? So all sorts of stuff. It really does bind to quite a few different things. Histamine, as you mentioned, and that's another thing. A lot of people that are dealing with immune system issues end up with an excess of histamine, especially if you have mast cell activation or something like that, and you have all these excess histamines causing a number of symptoms. A lot of people take ZeoCharge for symptoms management of those conditions because it does have the ability to directly bind to some of those excess histamine, some of the excess histamine, and reduce that immune response.
Yeah. And so just going back for a minute to what you said about fluoride and how ZeoCharge is a direct binder for some things, but some things it has an indirect effect and detoxes. So how does that work for something like fluoride?
Yeah, and I think that honestly, I think that is what makes Zeolite, when properly used, such an effective tool, is that it really works with the body and it gets the body to the point where it can naturally start detoxing properly again. Because I think that's one of the challenges. Our bodies kind of get clogged up, stop prioritizing, you know, detox to some extent. And then the ZeoCharge can get the body, kind of open the floodgates, work on detox pathways, get some lymph moving, all those things. And it just indirectly is going to remove some stuff. Like aluminum, for example. So zeolite is an aluminum silicate. It really is not going to have a strong bind to aluminum at all, but we're seeing this reduction in aluminum levels. I think it's just because as the zeolite is binding to lead, mercury, arsenic, some of these other metals that it has affinity for, then the body just kind of indiscriminately starts dumping the rest of the metals with it from the tissue. So that's where you're getting the dump of the aluminum, the fluoride, and some of these other things, just because the body says, you know what, let's just release it all at once.
Yeah, and I've definitely found that to be my experience as well. In fact, I just went through kind of a little bit of a mini dump and all by itself. I mean, my body just decided to do it all by itself, which is kind of cool because I was struggling for so long trying to pull it out, trying to get it out, and my immune system was such a mess. And then you're just wasting the OSR or whatever synthetic chelator you're taking because your body's not gonna want to detox anything. So the other thing was, how does Zeal Charge compare to like an OSR or a synthetic chelator? What makes it different?
Yeah, I think it's just the broad spectrum binding capacity. That's the main thing because I think OSR, there's no doubt that OSR is going to have a stronger direct bind to mercury, right? I don't think anyone's going to argue that. There's nothing that has as strong of a direct bind to mercury as something like OSR, right? We know that. Now, what I found from the case studies is that shockingly to me, sometimes the ZeoCharge is actually more effective at removing mercury from tissue than OSR. And that's what really got me thinking about all this indirect detox stuff because if it was just all about direct detox chelation, then OSR is going to work 100% of the time better than ZeoCharge. But from some of the case studies, people were taking OSR and it was really not removing. After a certain period of time, it just stopped removing tissue levels of mercury. And then the ZeoCharge got the ball rolling again. And I think it's because removing any sort of chelation, any sort of detox can be stressful on the body. And the more stress the body gets out from whatever protocol, the less likely the body is to start naturally dumping some of these toxins for excretion because it is trying to protect itself from that stress. So from ZeoCharge, as you're binding to this broad spectrum of things, primarily in circulation, right? And potentially this is the ammonia, the excess histamine, the mycotoxins, things that are kind of causing your body to work overtime every day, taking up a lot of your energy. As you start removing those things, and kind of calming the storm in the body, your body is now in a better position to release the metals from the tissue areas for excretion. So I think that's really how ZeoCharge is working effectively for some of the metals because it's just cleaning up a lot of the other stuff in circulation, getting the body to naturally release, opposed to OSR, which is really specifically designed for mercury, also binding to lead, cadmium, arsenic, etc. But it's really not going after any of those other things. So if you pull mercury out and you stir up all this stuff in the process, you break open some biofilms, you have some microbial mayhem occurring, all this stuff. You've now caused this great deal of stress on the body while trying to remove mercury. And if that event becomes too stressful, I think your body says, you know what, I'm not going to let go of the mercury anymore. And then you have this situation where you have a chelator fighting against your body's resistance to releasing the metal. I think that could potentially cause some symptoms as well. Because in a healthy person, I think, yes, you could take a chelator, it's going to go in and remove things from tissue. But if your body doesn't want to let go of the mercury for whatever reason, just trying to protect you in some way, then I don't think it's going to.
Yeah, and that besides your dosing theory, I think was one of the most fascinating things to me that really resonates with my own experience is your theory on the level one, two, and three detox.
Yeah. So I've kind of categorized things into, three ways the body kind of stores toxins, three levels of detox. I think you've got level one, which is going to be circulation. So those are the toxic elements that are basically being exposed to the main systems of your body, your immune system, kind of floating around in circulation. That's level one. Level two is going to be the general tissue. So that's going to be just kind of surface area tissue, kind of spread out, dispersed throughout the body. And then I think a level three detox is going to be the deeply stored metals. This is going to be a lot of the metals in your organs and areas where these metals have basically been there for a long time. So I think what happens is you're exposed to a number of toxic elements, and immediately it's in level one, right? That's where it's in your system. Your body tries to process it and tries to get rid of it. But whatever your body can't immediately get rid of, it has to do something with, right? Because if there's too much for your body to handle, it's just going to cause too many symptoms and it has to do something. So whatever it can't get out through natural detox processes, I think it has to put into a storage bin. And that's going to be level two. And that's going to be just general tissue. It puts it there. I like to consider that a holding area because ideally the body says after things calm down in level one, which is circulation, we're going to take what we just put in storage in level two, we're going to put it back into level one and get rid of it. Now, if the issue in level one doesn't get cleared, and then this storage bin in level two now starts filling up, it needs to go somewhere else. And I think that's where it goes to level three, which is deep storage. And that's going to be more organs and areas where the body just kind of keeps it for safekeeping. And I think the key to consider here is that the body is really always more focused on short-term survival over long-term thrival. So even if the body has to keep something incredibly toxic like mercury in an organ, it would prefer to do that opposed to having it floating around where your immune system is constantly attacking it, resulting in all sorts of inflammation and symptoms. So if your body can't handle having a lot of mercury being detoxed, it's just going to put it into storage, I think. So I think really the key, and once things are in level three, I think it's very difficult to remove because the body's going to be resistant to releasing the level three metals until you've cleared up level one and two, because there's not going to be room there. So let's say you're full in all three levels, right? One, two, three, you just incredibly have a high toxic burden. Then you take a chelator or some sort of detox agent that pushes some of these metals from level three into levels two and one. Your body was already at its max capacity of what it could handle. Now you get all these symptoms because you have all this, you actually have extra toxicity as your body's trying to excrete these things. And that could be an issue. And at that point, the body says, you know what? I can't handle this right now. I'm going to stop letting go of these metals from level three. Then you continue taking the detox supplement. Usually at that, I think in a lot of people, you're not even detoxing at that point because your body's resisting it. And then you have a fight against, the detox agent and your body. So I always like to say, let's have the detox protocol work with your body, not against it. And the detox, I think, really has to be gentle for it to be effective and sustainable, because I think a lot of people have to detox consistently for many months to years in order to remove these deeply stored metals. And if you're having incredibly, terrible symptoms, detox actions, and it's a stressful experience, it's going to be very limited because your body's just not going to want to let go of this stuff.
Yeah, and I totally resonate with that as far as my hands. I had horrible joint pain, ligament pain about 6 months into OSR, and I really started getting concerned that I was going to get arthritis. And it does feel like there's this like fight going on in your body where there's probably something in there maybe that needs to come out, but it just wouldn't come out. And and then all that finally settled down. So yeah, because some of the concerns from I've heard from a couple people who've been on OSR and they're getting like this head pressure, and they're just concerned that taking zeolite's going to do the same thing. So does zeolite go into your brain and kind of like start yanking stuff out, or how is that a different process?
I think, I mean, and that's another, area of debate, I suppose, on the internet, where zeolite's going, because you've got these liquid zeolite products saying like, yes, it definitely crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's grabbing this stuff. And then you got the powders like, oh, it's definitely not all this. I don't know exactly where it's going, but I don't think, I personally do not think it is getting to the brain. And if it is, okay. Let me start over here. Let me say that what I think is that it doesn't have to enter the brain in order to detox the brain, because I think ideally your body naturally, through the lymphatic system and just natural detox processes, your body starts releasing metals from the brain when it's ready into levels 2 and 1, and your body then escorts them out. That's what I think is really the key to an effective detox. Because if something is going into the brain and trying to pull on a metal, if your body doesn't want to let go, then your body's probably not going to let go. And then you might get some sort of symptom, because it's basically a fight at that point between the chelator and the body, right? So, for example, and I do have a case study I can pull up that basically helps explain what I'm saying. Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
All right, let me screen share here. There we go. This is going to be an interesting one. So, what I think there's a difference between, whenever we look at a study, we have to look at who is being studied, and just really think about this. Because if you were just recently exposed to mercury, let's say, and it's recently in your system, or you were injected with mercury poison for whatever reason, you take something like OSR, or an effective chelator, it's going to go in and just grab all this stuff and get it out of your body, because your body doesn't want it. It's not used to it. It wants it out immediately. It's causing immediate stress. Now, let's say you've bioaccumulated mercury over 25 years from having amalgam fillings in your mouth. Now, we have to consider that the chelator is going to respond differently, and someone in that situation is going to respond differently to the chelator. Because at that point, I think the body may be harboring the mercury in organs as a defense mechanism, because they become so toxic that trying to remove it is too stressful for the body. So I think things like that have to be considered as we look at research for whatever we're looking at. Is the research done in someone with a complex health issue, or is this research done in someone with just acute mercury or other toxicity? So here's kind of the best thing I can show visually to kind of support my 3-level theory and just show how the body detoxes. So this is an individual. I'm going to show you a series of 4 tests here, and this is a weekly test. So I tested this individual, 73-year-old, he had the amalgams, a mouthful of amalgams. So you can kind of see that from the silver and the mercury levels being pretty elevated here. And he's not taking any supplements. He's not taking any chelators, just pretty much doing absolutely nothing. So we started him on 10 grams a day of ZeoCharge, and this is the only thing he's taking. And you can see that after 7 days, this is after 7 days here, he's already releasing metals. So what I think level 2, the gray is the baseline, and remember the tissue of your hand. So I would consider that level 2, because we're already looking at a general metal level. But what we want in a detox is to get to level 3. We want to get the metals out of organs. So as the metals are actually rising, you see they're creeping up a tiny bit. That's indicating that the body is releasing the metals from somewhere, probably organs. They're coming into the tissue of your hand. So that they're going from level 3, deep storage, to level 2, short-term storage, and eventually they're going to go to level 1 and out the body. So this is exactly what you want to see. Okay, so, and we'll also show you that as he's doing this, his vitamins are actually starting to improve, which is pretty cool. So it's not stressing him out at all. This entire experience that I'm showing you, no symptoms at all. So he didn't experience any symptoms from this detox, which is what you want. All right, this is day 0 to 7. This is day 0 to 14. So this is after another week on the product. You can see that the metals are now even higher, right? So they're creeping up a little bit. They're creeping up even more. So his body's continuing to dump these metals from deeply stored areas. And it just shows you that his body wasn't able or willing to naturally remove these metals without support of the ZeoCharge. because he's had, 73 years old, he's had these fillings for probably 50 years, and they were just stored in organs, and his body probably didn't want to deal with the stress of getting rid of them. But now that he has the encouragement and the support of the ZeoCharge, his body says, you know what, let's start removing these things. So is it that the ZeoCharge is actually going in and grabbing all these? Potentially. Or it's possible that it's just that the ZeoCharge is doing such a great job of effectively binding to a number of toxic elements in circulation, like the ammonia, the mycotoxins, the metals, whatever, that the body now has room to receive some of these deeper level toxicities, metals in this case. So anyway, we're seeing an increase again. Notice that the aluminum decreased on both of them as well. Sometimes they don't all go in sync, or maybe he just didn't have deeply stored aluminum. So we don't know. Okay. Also, the vitamins. His vitamins have improved even more, which is incredible. This is in January in Iowa. So this individual is not taking a vitamin D supplement. He is not in the sun at all. And you can see that his vitamins, including vitamin D, on the tissue level are improving. And I do see this all the time. In order to raise the tissue levels of vitamin D, if you have mercury issues, you generally have to remove the mercury to allow the vitamin D tissue levels to increase. You can get an elevated blood level of vitamin D. Usually the tissue does not increase unless you remove the toxicity like mercury. Okay, so that's 2 weeks, right? Levels rising more. Great, we're detoxing. Everything's going great. It's effective, it's efficient. Vitamins are improving. And I also want to point out minerals. On his initial test, he had a very high zinc to copper ratio, which indicates some sort of immune response. So a cytokine storm, some sort of inflammatory event, immune reactivity, that is balancing. So his immune system is calming down. So whether it was the mercury is causing the immune reactions, or maybe it was some other toxic element that we have not tested for here, his system was calming down. Fantastic. This is where it gets interesting, and this is kind of the whole point right here. Now, after the 2 weeks, he reported that he was exposed to his son, who got pretty sick with, whatever, and was very symptomatic, coughing, sneezing, all that stuff. His son got pretty sick. Now, this individual did not report getting any symptoms at all, but we can tell from the test that his immune system was challenged with something. And we can tell that from 3 ways. One, because now his immune marker, zinc copper, is activated again. So his immune system's now been stimulated. We can see that his vitamin levels actually decreased. So his body has to use up additional resources to fight something. Now, one of the reasons he was not symptomatic was potentially because he had built up this nice reserve of vitamins during the previous 2 weeks. So maybe he would have been symptomatic if he wouldn't have been on the ZeoCharge. That's speculation. But the point is, these levels are decreasing because his body's under stress. Now, this is super interesting. Look at this. Because remember, before, these metals were rising, but now that his body has been challenged with something, his body stops releasing the deep level metals. See how now the metals are all going down or stopping? Because his body now is prioritizing its energy to focus on whether this is an infection or something else. His body is focusing its energy on that. So it says, you know what, let's just put on hold this detox. And he's still taking the ZeoCharge, so it's still binding. So that's why these levels are reducing, but he's not continuing to dump out metals from deep storage. So you can see that in an individual that is dealing with chronic Lyme, mycotoxin illness, or some other issue where they're constantly stressed out by something, their body is going to have a difficult time detoxing because it doesn't always prioritize detox. Because with toxicity like metals, the body says, you know what, I have a storage bin for these things. I'm going to put these metals in tissue and organs and just fat, right? But some of these other immediate threats, the body doesn't have any way to deal with them besides actively trying to get rid of them. So the body often doesn't prioritize detox, as we see here. Okay, now the next week, you can see that, and he felt nothing the whole time, but you can tell he was recovering because now the vitamins are improving again, and he's very slowly starting to dump metals again. So if he would have continued being afflicted with whatever that was for months at a time, he probably wouldn't have been detoxing the whole time. So that is, I love that case study just because it shows that it's really the body that is in charge of detox, right? He was taking the same amount of zeolite, 10 grams per day, this entire month period, but his body responded different to the product based on what was currently happening in his body. When he was healthy enough, his body released the metals for detox. When he wasn't healthy enough to detox, his body stopped detoxing.
Yeah, just fascinating.
Yeah.
Really fascinating. And you had mentioned Lyme. We had a lot of questions on Lyme. If you want to talk about that as well.
Sure. So, and I think just in general, what I kind of tell people, and usually it's probably not helpful. I don't know why I always say it, but I like to say the key to an effective detox is to get as healthy as you can be. But then, of course, the key to getting healthy is a lot of times an effective detox. But the point is, if sometimes there's indirect ways to detox that aren't directly chelating metals, because let's say you have chronic Lyme, which a lot of time comes with mycotoxin illness and excess histamine and mast cell and some of these other things. If these things are all just your body's prioritizing all these things, if you can effectively remove those things, your body's natural detox processes are probably going to start working better and your body will naturally start processing metals. So I think that's one reason that the ZeoCharge is a lot of times more effective than other detox agents because it's helping with so many things. So Lyme, for example, a lot of times when people have these microbial issues, it's not necessarily the microbe itself that's causing the symptom. It's the waste products of the microbes, right? So Lyme, they're going to release their exotoxins and endotoxins. Those are going to be stimulating immune responses, which results in inflammation and all sorts of symptoms. So now, I don't think that the zeolite is directly binding to a lot of these bacteria. It may be. I mean, some of the research is showing it does help balance microbe levels. But once again, I don't know if that's a direct binding effect or if it's an indirect effect. What I do know is it is going to bind to some of the waste products of the pathogenic microbes. So, for example, one of the waste products of a lot of bacteria and like candida and yeast is going to be ammonia, which we discussed earlier. So when you're exposed, once again, we've kind of established ammonia is not good for you. So if you already have a bunch of ammonia that's causing toxicity, then you have this buildup of microbes, yeast, bacteria, whatever. They're releasing their waste products, which are also ammonia. Your body's not really processing it very well. You take the ZeoCharge, it binds up to all this ammonia. That's just going to be an incredible relief on its own. Yeast, for example, because ammonia is very alkaline. So yeast prefers an alkaline environment. So yeast produces ammonia, which is a toxic byproduct, but it also helps the yeast survive because it helps provide a terrain that the yeast is comfortable in. So by removing the ammonia, one, it could provide symptoms relief. Two, it could actually disrupt the environment of the yeast and cause the yeast to potentially die off or the immune system to attack it. So there's a lot of things with Lyme. Usually, in my opinion, it's never just Lyme. It's a number of things. I kind of put it on a spectrum. Generally, people with Lyme have, I call it the 4 M's: mold, metal, microbes, and magnetic field sensitivity. And it's just kind of a snowball effect. But you want to address as many things as possible because these things are opportunistic. They need an opportunity to take over your body. I think we all have Lyme. I think at least 95% of people have Lyme in them. It's just a matter of, in some people, the Lyme has the opportunity to take over. And that's when they start replicating and producing more ammonia, more byproducts, and they generally get better results from the ZeoCharge in terms of symptoms relief because they just can't keep up with that daily dose of toxicity they're dealing with. So in terms to answer your question, I don't know. It's not a direct line. It's definitely not something that's directly, just to kill Lyme. It's not a Lyme killer. It's just that as to assist in a Lyme protocol, I think it can be very helpful. And that's really how I look at ZeoCharge in general. It's not something that it's the only thing you need, right? I consider it a foundation to protocols because there's a lot of good protocols out there. ZeoCharge is definitely not the only thing most people need, but I consider it a foundation, and it just helps everything else work better because it's binding to so much toxicity and helps relieve the stress on your body, which calms the storm and allows your body to start regaining control.
Got it. Makes sense. And there's someone in the group who's actually, it's interesting you mentioned yeast because they've reported and they're taking what Aaron recommends, which works really well for me, and that's the undulacinic acid from Thorn. She's reported that it's really the ZeoCharge has really helped with the die off, because then that's another problem, right? You've got the symptoms when you have the candida, and then you get all these die off symptoms when you start killing it. So and she's actually been able to take higher doses of the yeast protocol because she doesn't have all the die-off symptoms from like the mess.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. And yeast, I mean, it's just yeast candida produces so many toxic, so many toxic byproducts. I mean, I don't know how many byproducts. And a lot of people do report some sort of effect with yeast when they take ZeoCharge. And I don't know once again, I don't know if it's directly binding to yeast in some way or if it's just binding to some of the byproducts. But a lot of people, it helps clear up athlete's foot. It can help clear, deal with fungal rashes, that kind of thing, and then internal issues. A lot of people use it to help with that. I think maybe part of it might be that a lot of times these fungi are going to be helping, or maybe not helping, but they're binding to mercury and some of these other metals and maybe to other toxic elements. And as you start removing those toxic elements, it kind of relieves the yeast of its job, and then your immune system can attack it. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of things that go into it, but yes. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, a lot of people do report some sort of positive effect regarding yeast when taking ZeoCharge.
Great. All right, next one. This is also a very asked question in the group. There's a lot of people who are taking the liquid zeolites. I was taking one as well. And the question is, what's the difference between the liquid zeolites and then the natural zeolites, like your ZeoCharge, that actually come from the earth? So it's a powder. And is there a difference in, because I think one of them, I think it's the TRS, that's the lab created zeolite. What would be the difference?
Yep. So with liquid zeolites, you've got kind of two categories. You've got the natural and synthetic. So the synthetic zeolite in general, it's lab grown. So TRS is going to call it a lab grown zeolite, but it's not naturally occurring. And that alone might have its own issues. It's just going to be different. Now, my concern with that primarily is one, I think it's going to be binding directly to the essential minerals because it's going to work by a little different mechanism. And also, there's a study showing asynthetic zeolite that causes accumulation or organ accumulation of aluminum. So the natural clenoptilite did not cause any aluminum toxicity, where this synthetic one they tested it against did cause aluminum toxicity. So I don't know if it's just because it's a synthetic aluminum versus a natural, or just the body didn't know what to do with it. Not quite sure, but I definitely personally kind of stay away from any zeolite that is synthetic for that reason primarily. Now, a lot of the liquids are natural zeolite as well. So those ones are just going to be the natural powdered clinoptilite zeolite mixed with water. And sometimes they're, colloidally suspended. A few of them will mix them with liposomes, call them a liposomal zeolite, something to that nature. But they're all going to be derived from the natural zeolite powder. So zeolite it's a mineral. So it's like a large mineral, like a rock. And then from there, it's processed into whatever particle size we want it to be. And that's another point. Most zeolites use a process called milling, which is very cheap. That's the commercial application where they just kind of crush the zeolite. And that's where, when I buy the zeolite for ice melt, it's milled zeolite. So they can crush it to smaller particle sizes, but a lot of the zeolite is going to be damaged because they've crushed the cages. And it's, once again, I'm not putting that in my body. That's a lot of the zeolites on the market. Ours and the other reputable products on the market are going to be micronized, meaning, so that's another question to ask. Is it micronized or milled? But micronized is a slicing motion where it's not destroying the integrity of the cage. It's just slicing it to make the particles as small as you want. So there's no such thing in nature as liquid zeolite, right? So it's not like there's some spring in some pristine environment somewhere that's flowing liquid zeolite and they're bottling it at the source. And that's right. There's nothing like that. It's just that they're taking the same base wherever they're getting their zeolite, they're processing it to a lot of times smaller particle sizes. They're mixing it with water, and then they're marketing it as they choose to do so. So the main challenge there is a lot of them are just not great quality. Just, there's a lot of products on the market. Some of them I've asked for their particles. I've asked for a number of documents from them. Most of them won't even give you third-party testing. A lot of the powders actually have larger particle size. Sorry, the liquids a lot of times have larger particle sizes than the powders. which shocks you, but it just shows you that there's basically nothing in the bottle. And that's it. So there's that. But the ones that are a little bit more reputable, probably the more popular liquid zeolite brands, generally have a smaller particle size. And that's kind of their claim to fame for the full body detox. But when you look on the bottle, generally the dose is going to be very small. Some of them won't give you the dose, but a lot of them range between 1 and 3 milligrams per serving. So, for example, ZeoCharge, one scoop has 5,000 milligrams. So, when you're looking at a liquid, even if you have the best quality zeolite in the world, third party testing, purified, remineralized, all that stuff, it's mixed in water. You've got this liquid zeolite. If you're taking 2.5 milligrams compared to 5,000, I mean, the effects are going to be limited. And that's where it's really tricky, because it's not that it's just not going to be working as well. That's where it can actually generate a very stressful experience on your body. So my whole theory on zeolite dosing is that 10 milligrams of zeolite is much more likely to cause a negative detox reaction than 10,000 milligrams. So the 1000x dose is actually gentler on your body than the low dose. And that's the problem with a lot of the liquids, is that they're such a low dose that they basically just go in, stir things up a little bit, cause all these negative reactions, but they don't have enough available zeolite cages to finish the job. So they kind of start the job, they can't finish the job. With the higher doses, which really can't be, you just can't get the higher doses in the liquid, because if there's 2.5 milligrams per serving and there's 60 servings per bottle, that's 150 milligrams per bottle. ZeoCharge has exactly 1,000 times the amount of zeolite as that. There's 150,000 milligrams per jar. And a lot of people need, 10,000 milligrams or 10 grams, 20,000. Some people need 30,000 milligrams per dose. And you're just not going to be able to do that with the liquid. So that's kind of my thoughts on the liquids, is they can be great quality. And I think there was a lot of, a good thought behind developing them. But now that this kind of is becoming accepted as, my theory on the dosing, they're kind of realizing that maybe they're not as optimal because of the dosing perspective. And then when you also consider my theory on detox, where the nanoparticles or whatever they're marketing them, they don't directly have to go into the brain or into organs to remove zeolite, they might not be all as great as we thought they were.
Got it. And as long as you brought up the dosing theory, let's just like dive into that. I know your dossier is 14 pages, which I really encourage everybody to read. Again, I think it's just so brilliant, and it applies to so many other things besides zeolite. But if you were just to kind of like summarize what your dosing theory is, and also I just want to mention really quickly too that I think it's funny that Detox last year was their support department was recommending that I take less and less until I was just getting all these horrible redistribution symptoms. And this year, maybe they've read your dossier, because now they're saying take more, which of course you can't get enough. But anyway,
I actually had a discussion with them last night. The person who's putting all that information out,
oh,
who's distributing it. Yeah. So basically for Detox. And I just said, they took it all from my site. They acknowledged it. But
oh, they did. You actually,
yeah.
you actually called them on the carpet on that?
Yeah, but the thing is, because they're like, well, do you want us to stop promoting that? Because they said we'll stop, using it. And I said, well, it depends on if it's working. I mean, yeah, if it's helping people, I'm all about helping people, but is it? And they said, we don't know. I said, because you have to consider saying that with the liquid zeolite is probably having a reverse effect, because you have to cross a threshold of getting a high enough dose. Because if 2.5 milligrams is causing symptoms, 5 milligrams or 10 is probably going to cause even more. You might have to get to 5,000 or 10,000 to get that effect. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. So I said, reach out to your customer service team and everyone, get the feedback, see if it's helping. If it is, continue. But otherwise, that might be a terrible, it just might not apply to your product. And they said, okay. So
Wow. So they actually did admit then that that's your dosing theory that they're using.
Yeah, they just said it was better information than anywhere else, so they were using it. And it's not like Yeah, you can't really copyright a lot of that. It's just saying a higher dose is gentler than a low dose. It's not like I'm the only person that can say that. I don't want to be the only person that can say that. I just want to make sure the information's in the right hands and actually helping people.
Right.
And
So
that's what they were trying to do. In fairness, that they just said this makes sense. This theory is fantastic. We need to help our people get better results. And I completely respect that.
yeah, I mean, well, and it's a lot better than telling people to take less.
Yeah.
That is cyto detox because it can, I felt like I was being poisoned. It was like really awful. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive into your dosing theory and
Sure.
just kind of summarize. I know you can't go through all 14 pages, but just kind of summarize.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I think the key is to, and I use words like total binding capacity, and that just means the amount of zeolite particles. So I think the key is to take enough zeolite where you have enough available zeolite particles to bind to everything in circulation, and then to have leftover zeolite particles there to bind to anything that gets pushed into circulation through the stress of the detox process. So, for example, if you take a little bit, it might go in and bind to a few things, but there's so many factors that need to be considered. One, there could potentially be biofilm disruption, where now you've released some yeast, you've released all sorts of things. Your body might be producing excess histamine because of the stress. There might be increased free radical production. Your body now doesn't have energy to deal with ammonia and all these other things because you have this extra toxicity that's been generated from this low dose. So I think just in general, when you detox, you don't want to feel anything or you want to feel better. When you feel worse, it's actually a sign of an increased toxic burden temporarily. And if that can be avoided, you want to avoid it at all costs because that just means it's stressful. And then you're going to get redistribution and other things. So basically, if you imagine zeolite as a little soldier, right? Your body has its natural its natural capacity, its natural soldiers fighting these things. When you have these symptoms on a daily basis, your body might not be able to handle everything you're exposed to on a daily basis. You add these little zeolite soldiers; they're coming in and they're helping, helping in this battle. Now, sometimes I'm going to skip this example. This example is not. So I don't think that was going to be helpful. That example is more clearly communicated on the dose theory, but I don't think I'm going to be able to pull it off right now. So basically, the key is taking a low dose stirs things up and makes a little bit of a mess, while taking a higher dose stirs things up, but there's enough available zeolite to clean up the mess that was generated. And that mess might be from excess histamine, excess whatever, biofilm disruption, free radical production, a number of other things. One thing I'd like to mention, I think this is helpful, is the redistribution aspect, because people ask me about it a lot. You have to understand how zeolite works. It's a swap mechanism. So let's say you have let's say the zeolite comes in and it naturally has magnesium, which it does. It swaps the magnesium for mercury, which is great. So now you have magnesium trapped in its cage. The problem is zeolite has a stronger affinity for lead than mercury. So what if now that same zeolite particle comes across some lead, it's going to swap the mercury for the lead. Now you have this free floating mercury. Now, if all of your zeolite cages are full, that mercury is free to float around. It's going to be, exposed to the immune system, attacked, potentially cause symptoms, and potentially redistribute. Now, if you had a higher dose, you have extra zeolite particles on the sideline waiting, that will then bind to that mercury that was dropped. And then you don't get the symptoms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. That
Okay.
makes total sense. It is a little spooky taking 6 tablespoons at once for the first time, but it absolutely makes sense. And can you explain to a lot of people who are starting, including myself, what causes that kind of soothing feeling? It just calms it's very calming for the central nervous system.
Yep. So I think it's just that binding to circulating toxicity that your body's having a difficult time processing from it just on a day-to-day basis. So I call it the daily dose of toxins. And that's going to be what your body's daily exposed to in circulation. That's from external exposure, right? Food, water, air, potentially mycotoxins, whatever, and also internal production. So that's going to be your internally produced toxins from metabolic waste like ammonia, and then the microbial waste products like ammonia and other things as well. So if you've got all this going on and your body is just not able to handle it, and you're just feeling terrible all the time, it's just stimulating your central nervous system, it's stimulating your immune system, then you take the ZeoCharge and it just helps bind to all these things that your body was just not able to process. It just immediately can have a calming effect because it just lets your body regain control, basically. So one, it's going to by binding to immunostimulatory agents like the mycotoxins and the metals. As you bind to those and escort them out of the body, that's going to calm down the immune system. When you calm down the immune system, you calm down the inflammatory load on the body, because an immune reaction equals inflammation. So one of the best ways to reduce inflammation in your body is to remove inflammatory agents that are causing an immune reaction resulting in inflammation. So I think that's really what's happening, is just lowering your daily dose of tox, just binding to things floating around that your body just wasn't able to process on its own.
Got it. Now, I noticed from your case studies, they're everything from 2 tablespoons all the way up. I think I saw a 9 in there or a 6. And so, for someone like the 72-year-old who had all the amalgam, but he wasn't symptomatic. So, a lot of people in our group are come in already being symptomatic. So, is that where like the difference between starting at 2, where your suggestion is to start somewhere between 4 and 6? Is that more for people who are experiencing the symptoms? They should start higher, versus somebody maybe who has a suspicion that they're mercury toxic, but they're not having any symptoms at all. Then they can start at the 2.
Yeah. So just generally, the healthier you are, the less you need. And just so the more things you have going on. So if you know that you've got yeast issues, you've got mycotoxin illness, you've got excess, if you know you have a number of things, you're just going to want to really take a higher dose up front to deal with all of that toxicity, the different layers of the onion. Now, I would say and tablespoons are now scoops. So in the case studies, that was before we had, the finished product. So now there's scoops in there. So when I say tablespoon, it's one heaping scoop. So keep that in mind, one heaping scoop, and that's 5 grams. So one scoop per day, that's going to be kind of a maintenance dose, just to bind to all the stuff floating around, reduce some, oxidative stress, all that stuff, just to support you. Now, for an actual, what I call a detox dose for someone that's trying to remove some of these deeply stored things, I always recommend at least 2 scoops, which is going to be 10 grams, at least 2 a day starting off. And from there, if you experience some sort of negative detox reaction, which a lot of times it's a headache, and that occurs usually within 30 to 60 minutes, then you actually want to take more. And generally, you want to take more immediately. Just take that additional 10 grams. So if you took 10 grams, got a headache, take another 10 grams right when you get the headache. Then the next day, you want to go straight to taking 20 grams. And I always recommend 1 dose per day. That's ideal because you don't want to stir things up multiple times, or at least that's what the case studies were on. We found it to be effective, where the key is to get a high enough dose on each dose. So 20 grams all at once, 4 scoops. Fantastic. If that doesn't work, the next day do 6 scoops all at once. And you kind of have to keep working your way up and seeing if it's continuing to make you worse, then maybe it's, that's going in the wrong direction. You want to kind of see the trend. But what I just really don't recommend, because people do it all the time and it just generally doesn't work, for people that are more sensitive, if you take like an eighth of a scoop or a fourth of a scoop just to try it out, it just really is not a good idea, because it can have everything I've said today could be null and void because of that, because it's all about your body's response to the product. So the higher dose is able to offer a gentle detox experience in most people. That's the goal. If you take a low dose and it offers a harsh detox experience, that's what you don't want. So I would say for people that are more sensitive, that are dealing with the mycotoxins, the Lyme, just that are prone to detox reactions from chelators and other things, I would honestly do at least 4 scoops the first day, right off the bat. 6 would be even better. But I would say between 4 and 6 would really be ideal. And then you can experiment from there. So let's say you do 4 and you feel incredible. You could either maintain on that, or you could try, to go to 3. and see if that gets the same results. If that causes a symptom, you go back up to 4. So there's always going to be a little bit of trial and error with this because there's no way to know the exact optimal dose for people. But just in general, for between the 2 and 6 scoops per day seems to work best. But for people that are more sensitive, that 4 to 6 scoops taken all at once, and that's 20 to 30 grams taken all at once per day, really seems to kind of be the sweet spot.
Got it. And what we've learned too in our little group that have started this is if you're already having problems with the synthetic chelator, if you're on OSR or you're getting uncomfortable symptoms, the thing is to not take it with the zeolite, to stop the OSR, whatever you're taking, let zeolite calm everything down. That's what I did. I stopped OSR altogether, let everything calm down. And now I can take it, but it's a completely different experience. So we've learned that. And we've learned that people who are doing well on OSR aren't getting the symptoms, that you can take it together with the zeolite and it just kind of cleans up the mess that the chelation process makes. So you just get a more effective detox and stabilize your body. So it will release, like what you were talking about in levels 1, 2, and 3, it will start kind of releasing that on its own. But if you're already having problems with OSR, don't take it with the zeolite. Just maybe think about taking a break from that and just do the ZeoCharge until everything gets calmed down. I do have some dosing questions. There are
Sure.
3 mothers or parents, and their children are, so they're all 3 different parents, and the children are 6, 9, and 12. They each want to know, are these dosing directions going to be the same for their children? And then also in the case of the 6-year-old, this little one is allergic to everything, she says. So is this going to, so she's got him on, she doesn't say the specific medicine, but I'm assuming it's an antihistamine of some kind. Will taking ZeoCharge interfere with the allergy medication she's already giving her son?
Great questions. So for first part of that is the dosing recommendation. Everything I've said regarding dosing is for a 150-pound individual. So that's kind of just the baseline. So if you were going to do 20 grams for 150 pounds, if you're 75 grams, you do half of that, 10 grams. If it's so just that ratio, use your calculator. 150 grams, 150 pounds is what I mentioned, taking between the 4 and 6 scoops. Now, children a lot of times won't need quite that high of a dose because in general, and it depends on their level of sensitivity, but a lot of times they're a little bit less sensitive and it might not be as important to get that super high dose. But I do want to say, because zeolite is non-toxic, it's not bioaccumulating in your body, it's not directly binding to essential minerals and vitamins, you always want to err on the side of a higher dose. The only reason to not is just be straight. It's just not doable financially because at super high doses, it could become a financial burden when taken long term. So that's why really, if you can, if that's not an issue, you always want to just take a higher dose. Otherwise, you can kind of try to start high, work your way down, and get to the point where you have that dose that you're not getting symptoms, but you're not, taking too much and wasting it type of thing. So for children, a lot of times they'll do, like a teaspoon, just get like a teaspoon measure or do 1 teaspoon type of thing, but it goes on weight. I mean, if the child is, 40 pounds versus 100 pounds, just go by weight, I would say is the best thing to do for that. And then for the antihistamine medication, I always say when taking any natural substances, then generally they can be taken at the same time as zeolite. So like an herb or something can usually be taken at the same time. But when you're taking something synthetic, generally you want to take it away. So like a medication, just because we don't know what is in that medication that could potentially have, ZeoCharge could potentially have a binding affinity for. We really never get any negative reports on that, but it's just hard to say. One thing I will say, antibiotics, zeolite does directly bind to antibiotics. So if you're on antibiotics, you probably don't want to take zeolite at the exact same time as antibiotic because you could, bind to it and diminish its work. So there's things like that. A lot of times it's more of an indirect mechanism. So a lot of people that are on like insulin, for example, sometimes they have to adjust their dosage of insulin when taking zeolite, not because the zeolite is binding to insulin, but potentially because it's reducing the body's need for external insulin. So things like that, whenever you're starting something as powerful as a Zeolite product, you want to basically monitor what you're doing, just monitor your levels of things to make sure everything's still going well. But in terms of like an antihistamine, I don't really see there being much of an issue there. But just to be safe, don't take it at the exact same time, right? So just take it a few hours apart or as far apart as you can.
Got it. And I know for myself, I take T3. So I take it in the morning, I take it in the afternoon, and then I take my ZeoCharge at night. And I haven't had any problem with that at all.
Yeah. And that's another key. ZeoCharge can be taken at any time. It can be taken with food or on an empty stomach. So that's another thing that kind of sets it apart. So it kind of depends what you're going for. So if ammonia is one of your main issues, which your levels of ammonia might be higher after you eat because it's a metabolic waste product, then maybe you would get the best results when taking ZeoCharge shortly after a meal. If your issues are primarily mycotoxins, maybe it's better first thing in the morning. So I like to tell people kind of take it when you're most symptomatic because you'll notice the biggest difference. But you can take it at any time of day. There's not one thing that I found that really works way better than the other. I personally take it right before bed because for me, that's when I'm calmest. Because if I'm really busy all throughout the day, when you're calmer, you're always going to naturally detox better anyway, because you want to be more in a parasympathetic rest and digest state, opposed to being all over the place where your body's going to be less willing to detox.
Yeah, I like taking it at night too. It's
Yeah.
great for sleep. It's great for sleep. All right, what else here? Okay, so we've got this question about, I call it the particle size theory. So there's a theory out there that if you take, I guess if you take just the larger particles, they're recommending to do that first because they bind in the gut, and then you do that for a while, and then you move to a smaller particle size that will get in the tissues. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but um, what do you say to that?
Um, I'm not familiar with the theory, but I just from hearing it, I would say I kind of understand where they're coming from. They're basically saying that maybe the smaller particle sizes, full body detox might be too stressful. So starting with something that just binds in the gut can kind of clear things up to get your body to the point. Um, I see the logic. The problem is I don't know if the smaller the particle size, the more effective the zeolite's going to be, for one, because it has increased surface area. So if you're taking a larger particle sized powder, you would need so much of it to get to the proper dose just in your gut. It might not be doable. So you might, I mean, I don't know, but you might need 90, 100 gram, something ridiculous, some ridiculous amount just to get to that binding capacity. Whereas you could take a smaller dose of ZeoCharge, which has much smaller particle sizes, and it's going to be doing everything in the gut plus more. So I think that theory has some merit for like just a liquid zeolite that's just going into circulation and it's not leaving anything in the gut as a binder and it's generating a stressful experience. But that's kind of why we combined both because we're getting the larger particles to stick around in the gut and act as the binder, and we're getting the smaller particles for a full body detox. But I do think the dose is very important there because the more you take, the more you're going to have sticking around in the gut. And as long as you have enough to basically grab everything currently floating around, then you shouldn't be getting the detox reaction. So I think with some other products, maybe that could potentially be a decent strategy, but I think it's just not going to be necessary with ZeoCharge because it kind of takes care of that issue, just how it was designed.
Got it. All right. And our next question is about taking DMPS. This person's trying to reduce lead levels in his body. If he takes it with the ZeoCharge, is that going to uh, pull too much lead? What's your recommendation there?
So ZeoCharge actually does have a pretty strong binding affinity for lead. So some people do combine ZeoCharge with DMPS and other chelators. A lot of people just take the ZeoCharge and get just as fast of a detox. So it goes back to what is the body willing to release. So is the DMPS going to be going in and actually removing lead from the tissue or the bone, wherever it's going, or is it not? And I think that's the main question, because if it's not, the DMPS might not even be needed, because then the key is to bind to some of the other elements along with the lead to get the body to naturally release. And at that point, then maybe the DMPS is helpful because then it just goes and snatches everything up that was released. So hard to say. A lot of people do take them together, and I think there can definitely be some great benefit because there's synergistic effects. You've got the really strong direct lead binding capacity with DMPS. Then you've got the whole body detox support with the ZeoCharge that's binding to some of the other elements that are floating around and potential stress of that detox. So yeah, it's just kind of a personal choice whether someone wants to try to combine them or if they want to just try ZeoCharge, and it kind of just it's up to them. But yeah, I can see the benefit of both. But I will say taking just DMPS on its own would probably not be as ideal as taking DMPS with the ZeoCharge because you really want that additional support to help make the detox less stressful.
Got it. All right. And do you just want to tell people what to expect when they first start taking ZeoCharge? Like when are they going to experience something, a benefit, just kind of what to expect in general.
Sure. And I think it really, that's going to depend on what is going on in each individual's body. But if someone that is in that situation where they just can't even handle this total circulating load of toxicity on a daily basis, they might feel better in an hour after taking it. I mean, that's not uncommon at all. It just depends on kind of what the primary goal is. So some people take ZeoCharge long term for symptoms management, for more chronic issues, because it's just a binder. They're using it as a binder to grab things floating around, right? And then some people are using it more for detox. And when I say detox, when I say binder, I'm referring to level 1, grabbing stuff in circulation. When I say detox, I'm referring to removing deeply stored levels 2 and 3 metals and other toxic elements. So I think if someone's primarily goal, if someone's really not that symptomatic and they're just trying to remove mercury because they have the fillings and they know mercury's in their body, then really what they want to feel is nothing short term if they're not symptomatic, because you don't want to feel worse. But then long term, you might start experiencing benefit that you didn't even know was there to experience. So a lot of people will experience improved eyesight where they have to change their prescription because their eyes are improving, things like that. So issues they didn't know they had, and then they're not getting sick as often or at all. They're just their skin is clearing up, things like that. So that's more of a long term, because as you start removing the mercury from the deeply stored areas, it might take 3, 6, 12 months. It just depends on the person to really start experiencing some of those benefits. But if you're at the point where if it's calming down your immune system and calming the storm, that person's probably going to feel it within the first 3 days. I would say it just really, really depends on what it is. And yeah, it's just variable per person to person. But the key is you don't want to feel worse. You want to feel better, or you want to feel nothing. If you feel nothing, it doesn't mean it's not working. It just means it's probably working at a deep level, and it's working so well that you're not feeling anything yet.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that was my experience too. When I first took it, I got like immediate relief and everything calmed down. And then I felt nothing. And then you do kind of wonder, okay, did it stop? Do I need to take more? So going through nothing, but then you test, and that's how you find out that, well, you were feeling nothing, but you were actually, more was going on. You were actually dumping metals. So it might go in phases where you might feel initial benefits and then everything calms down and then you don't feel much of anything. So it might cycle like that too, right?
Yeah. So like, for example, in the case studies, a lot of the people, it was mixed, but a lot of people didn't have, serious serious, hypersensitivities. They just had their general issues, and immediate, the first month, the first 2 months, they really didn't experience physical benefits, but on the results, we're seeing that they're definitely detoxing metals and they're getting improvements in minerals and vitamins. So things are working. And then usually it was like 2 to 4 months in, they started saying, oh, wow, my joints don't hurt anymore. Or, whatever it may be, they start experiencing these benefits, but for them, it's more just a longer term thing. But they didn't.
Than people who are symptomatic, they're probably going to feel more of their symptoms relieved
Yeah.
initially. Okay.
Yeah. And it might be because it can be a layer of the approach, layer to the onion approach as well. Because if you've got all this stuff floating around, you might have to really work on a lot of that stuff, that level 1 toxicity, and then maybe that takes a month or so until you get to level two, level three to start removing the deeply stored stuff. So that's another thing to consider. So it depends on what's causing the symptoms. Is it, what's floating around or some of the central nervous system? Maybe it's from, mercury accumulation in organs. It just kind of depends. So some people will experience different benefits after different periods of time.
A lot easier. I had, excuse me, one more question that I promised I would squeeze in there, and this is on the gadolinium. So there's someone in the mercury group. He says, I'm pretty sure I don't have mercury because I never had amalgams. I joined this group because people are also talking about gadolinium, and I have gadolinium poisoning that I've gotten from the IV contrasts. Do we have any studies or research that shows that ZeoCharge would help with gadolinium?
Yes, so gadolinium was one of the 15 metals that we tested for, and ZeoCharge definitely showed a great tissue reduction in gadolinium. And interestingly, and I'm going to quickly share my screen here, interestingly, the gadolinium was actually the metal that showed the greatest percentage decrease out of any of the metals, for whatever reason that is. So I've got a couple of them here, and so here we go. So for example, this individual was taking the 30 grams, 6 scoops of ZeoCharge once per day. And all of these are once per day. So, and I want to reiterate that I don't recommend trying to break this up to 2, 3, 4, 5 doses, because we tried that and it just does not work as well as taking it once a day. Okay. So this person, 64% reduction in tissue gadolinium after only 6 weeks of taking the 30 grams or 6 scoops per day. So most of the other ones you're seeing, sometimes they're 14, and it's all based on how much your body's going to let you dump. Some of them are 20, 30, 40, but these gadolinium ones, 64%, 70%, 60%. So it definitely, yes, it can help remove gadolinium, whether it just has a super strong bind to it, or it's just that the body is more willing to let go for whatever reason, I do not know. But yeah, it definitely can help remove gadolinium.